First, I just want to say I've been so fortunate in my life to get to go to so many different speaking events and workshops. I even worked at the company for a while that ran TEDx Atlanta and had the pull to bring in some of the most incredible speakers from around the world. And the set that we just saw is quite honestly one of the most inspiring sets to me. And I'm so grateful, AJ and Alyssa and Edward and Sylvia. Let's give it up for them again. One of the things that I love about Fuse is you get the caliber of people that we have here and the caliber of you, but it's a very intimate family setting for these 2.5 days. So it's not like you're distant 5,000 people away from Edward Clapp, but like you can share some airspace with him, right? And with all of you who do amazing things at your schools and organizations. So I'm going to warm up this panel a little bit. I'm going to introduce them quickly, but then ask them to be thinking as I introduce them about one or two things you would tell us about you that I'm not going to say in the introduction, okay? Be careful, Kirtan. All right. So, second chair, we've got Megan Leno, a 2018 graduate of Mount Vernon and an inaugural member of the Innovation Diploma Program. Yeah, give it up. She is currently a sophomore at UNC Chapel Hill. I went to Duke, by the way.
It's a thing.
And Megan's a Moorhead Keynes Scholar there. And we are very proud of her. And I'll say really quickly about her, like her first year in Innovation Diploma, she'll probably talk about this. She did not like me. It's great to have you here. AJ, I wouldn't have even gotten a 3.92. We've got Crystal Fernando from What Box Innovation Partner. She's an innovation leader, a coach, and a change maker. In full disclosure, she's also a parent at Mount Vernon. And I have to give huge props to Crystal. She found out today that she was wanted and needed on this panel, and she didn't even blink an eye. She said, I am there. I'd be happy to do anything I can. So thank you so much.
Happy to.
We have Ted Ward, the Education and Public Programs Coordinator at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. It's been wonderful to get to work around your projects with the school for, I guess, over a year now.
Yeah.
And it's great to have you here. Let's give it up for Ted. And two that I get to work with every day, such an incredible experience. Brad Droke, Director of the Innovation Diploma Program at Mount Vernon. Give us a little wave. I might slip up and call him his code name, which is Rabbit, every once in a while. So if you hear that, it's probably me accidentally just letting my normal relationship with him come out. And Megan Curtin, who I affectionately call the sister that I never got to have. She is the head of learning and innovation in our upper school and the founding director of the Innovation Diploma Program. So, yes. So I gave you a chance to be thinking. So one or two quick things about each of you so that the audience can get to know you. Relationships are foundational for learning that I would not have said.
Okay, the first thing is I'm a mother of two. I've got two little ones that go here at Mount Vernon. I have a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old who will tell you that her birthday's June 28th, so she's really 8. That's a little bit about me.
I love to be outside, and I climb a lot of mountains, and we also share that. And I also have an older brother that has a lot to do with my personality.
I have a 13-month-old daughter who is totally awesome and can walk and is getting all around our house currently. She is also a student here, which is awesome about Mount Vernon, is that we go all the way down to 6 weeks. So I never thought that I would get to be in the same school as her as such a little person.
So two things came to mind. The first was when Bo called me today and said, do you mind doing this? And I said, of course, yes. And then he said it was at 8 o'clock. And I thought, I have a 10-month-old who has never once slept through the night, ever. And so I thought, this is going to be a wild night for me. So I can't promise I'm my most articulate at 8 o'clock because this is like craziness, you know. The other thing was I was in the preschool the other day, and I took we'll talk about, I have clients who are learning design thinking, and I took a picture of the wall, and it said, how might we, and there was a word cloud, and it said, make a mess. And it was so cool, and I took a picture of it and sent it to my executive client, who's president, who's teaching her team about design thinking, and I said, well, look, the 2-year-olds can do it, so can you? So I thought that was interesting. It was really neat.
And yeah, I'm a recovering former public educator, but also somebody that's really trying to activate around social studies. I think one of the things when I moved to high school and taught there was really looking at political science from a science standpoint and trying to bring that to life through what I now do at the center.
Great. So thank you all so much. Just as a start, I'm going to ask a few questions and get the panel talking a little bit about the work of Innovation Diploma and Design Briefs, and then I'll come out there in my best Phil Donahue and get your questions from you, okay? For those of you that are old enough to remember Phil Donahue.
Dated reference.
I don't know any younger talk show hosts. So Megan, and Brad, I've mentioned Innovation Diploma several times in the introductions. Will you give us some high-level context of what Innovation Diploma is at Mount Vernon?
This is going to be I start every time because I'm on the end.
Okay.
No, it's okay. So I'll start, but I think probably the best person, hopefully, to talk about it is Megan. But Innovation Diploma program started a few years ago, really as a way to empower students to do real-world work now and to do things that they care about, to work on projects that they're excited about, to choose things that maybe their teachers aren't choosing for them, and to work on it. In the first year that Megan was in the program, we really tried to relinquish a lot of the control and ownership to the students, so much so that I think we failed in some ways, failed up, and gave maybe a little bit too much room for choice because everything is programmed for them in their day. And so to give too much choice too soon, I think could be a detriment. But you know, Megan could talk about a little bit, hopefully later she'll get into some of the stories about how that actually was maybe a positive thing for her. The program has since grown, and kids are working on projects for organizations, both nonprofit and for-profit organizations around the city of Atlanta and beyond, which is really exciting. We started with 13 members, and we're now up to
81.
81. So,
Yeah, everything that Megan has said. And I'm going to give you a little bit of my perspective. So we started in that place, and then by my senior year, the Innovation Diploma program adhered to our mission statement that Brad helped us form, which is that Innovation Diploma is a student-driven design firm, and that's incredibly inspired by change. We use the design thinking process to create impactful solutions and build creative relationships. So that's what it became by my senior year. And for me, Innovation Diploma means that I got to come to school every day and work on real-world projects from the Hive, which is upstairs. So every single day I was able to connect with an outside organization and solve some kind of problem and think deeply about a subject that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to interact with. So that's been my experience, and we'll get into it, I guess, later.
I think the only thing that I would add to touch on the point of it started as an elective 5 years ago. Over the span of the program, it's really become our way to innovate school at its core. So now we award core credit through what we do. So students earn humanities credit, science credit through the work that they're doing with external partners, which has been one of the biggest changes over the lifespan of the program.
So I just might add two things. One is that I don't know what your innovation strategy is at your school or place of work, but one of our strategies is to have a school within a school that we can test the most radical ideas in and see what it smells like, tastes like, walks like, and then think about spreading that in a bigger way to other places. And the second thing is if you take our 4 excellent speakers from the beginning of the night and you mash up their talk and you think about what Alyssa said about dreaming about the possibility, that's what Innovation Diploma has been for us in a lot of ways, is a way to bring to life an experiment of the things that they were talking about and us learn from that experiment. And then Crystal and Ted, will you share a little bit about what you do in your work? So it's probably good to know that Ted's been through a design brief experience with Innovation Diploma, and Crystal is on the front end of that in the beginning pipeline of bringing in new business to Innovation Diploma. And so tell us a little bit about what you both do and why you might be interested in working with high school students in that work.
Go ahead.
Well, obviously, high school students are kind of my bread and butter for the most part. What I try to do is, if you haven't been downtown Atlanta, we have the Center for Civil and Human Rights, which is not only a museum, but also a place for discourse and dialogue around rights-based issues. And one of the things that we try to do is nurture our K-12 community, not just to come to the center, but also do work in those communities. And so that's what brought me up here to this school that I still remark at every time I walk in.
So I guess I came about this relationship in our work a bit organically. So I do consulting for executives, helping leaders know how to use design thinking and innovate, but really I spend a lot of my time on the mindsets part of it, so the tools they can use, but it's truly the mindsets that end up. And I did that because I was with corporate for my entire career, my last 15 years with Intercontinental Hotels Group, and my last 10 years working with the EC or senior most leaders globally of that company to get new ideas to market. And I saw time and time again that it wasn't the project plan or the tool or the mechanics, and yeah, those things kind of get in the way, but really at the end of the day, I spent more time working with their coach or working behind the scenes with the behavior to not shut down ideas, not say no, but to create environments where great things can happen. And so that was my introduction through design thinking and brought design thinking into the organization. And then I most recently had a client, and I was at coffee with Bo, and we were talking about a healthcare client that I have that's exploring dignity as patient dignity is a very big thing in the healthcare, as we all, big changes in healthcare right now. And so learning design thinking and innovation tactics for executives can be a vulnerable thing because we didn't grow up with this as a toolkit, right? And yet you're supposed to have all the answers, and so it's a really interesting place. And so I work a lot kind of almost discreetly with executives, and this notion, and Bo was telling me about the design flash labs and other experiences that you have here, and we kind of had this thought around why not, and I know that the experience so far has been kind of the students playing the designers and offering solutions to the executives, and we're taking a slightly different tact on that, which is, hey, there's a group of executives that just learned design thinking, and yet there are these high school kids that know it more than you do. So that's a bit of a humbling experience, and at the same time, it's a win-win because they get to see it in action, and you know what? We as leaders and adults, we don't know how to be creative. And so I want to work with students because I feel like their minds are more open, and we've been, taught out, right? There's a great TED talk about the education, the creativity is taught out of us, and so I believe that it's a real win-win. Students get real-world experience, and executives get a humble experience learning new things in a safe environment, actually, because they're not with their peers, not always with their peers. So we're on the front end of it, but I'm really excited about it. I think that'd be cool.
Great. And maybe, Ted, a little bit more, and y'all certainly fill in at the other side of the panel. Will you tell us some about the recent design brief with the Center for Civil and Human Rights? What was it that we worked on?
Yeah, so we got involved, I guess, a little over a year ago, and got brought into the hive that Megan referenced, which you haven't been to. It's just like a popcorn thing of ideas, right? Like it's just all over the place. And I met Brad and Chris as well. And it just kind of clicked from there. And when we started talking about, the use of VR, and one of the things that we do is drive empathy at the center. And this idea by driving empathy through VR was really, really powerful. And so through a number of different iterations and conversations, the idea was kind of brought to bear that we were going to launch a VR exhibit around the 50th anniversary of King's assassination. And looking at how we could take folks forward in that vision that he left for us. And that's kind of where we kicked it off. And I think one of the things that was great working with Megan, I remember when they came to the center the first time, there was, 20-something kids, and I just remember going to Brad and says, I don't care who we have, but she needs to be part of it. And so from there, really, we encouraged them to look at the last sermon that King gave here in Atlanta, which is called The Drum Major Instinct, and they took that to incredible places. And they did something around that really not a lot of museums and learning centers were doing, which is creating publicly accessible VR technology and allowing people to see that in a way that moves them beyond just a gaming experience, but a really empathetic and a view of what that looks like today.
Great. And Megan, will you tell us some from your perspective what that design brief project was like and all the wealth of experience you had with virtual reality before that?
So none on the virtual reality side. But Ted mentioned empathy, and empathy in the vein of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, but then also empathy in the vein of the Drum Major Instinct sermon. So when this idea came to us, our team that got whittled down from that initial 20 students that visited the center, we really wanted to dive into that sermon because that was the capstone of what it means to be a servant. That's what King was talking about in that sermon. And we saw that at this time, about a year ago, that's the same time that the Parkland shooting had occurred, the Me Too movement was happening, and there was a massive uprising in the world of LGBT fighting for rights. So this idea came to fruition that we would use Dr. King's last sermon and his call to action for each person to be a servant, and we would use that to put the activists today out on display and allow each visitor to the center that was going to interact with our exhibit, to step into that activism and to see that, Dr. King started something, but his assassination did not end what he had started. And that these activists today that are there were student activists working on March for Our Lives to Parkland. Students that are standing up and saying, we also believe in this. This is something that needs to change. We just wanted to give them a voice. And so we dove into the virtual reality side of things because if you can't be there, you might as well try to be there, and virtual reality is the best way to do that. Something that I had in my brain, I think, throughout the entirety of the brief was, people don't always remember what you tell them, but they always remember the way you make them feel. And if VR was going to be our tool to make that happen, let's do it to the fullest extent that we can. So yeah, it started out with, listening to Dr. King and his words, finding those activists from our world today, and then putting their message on display in a way that anybody that stepped into the center would be able to feel empowered by today's activism. So that was what it was for me, just a lot of empathy and stepping into the mind of a visitor. How can we empower them to do something more? And we were given all the tools to make that happen. So it was a great time.
And I think one of the really interesting parts of that work, and Megan briefly touched on it, was how reactive the students were to current events in the moment. So being able to take that social studies content through the King's speech and looking at it, especially here in Atlanta, was really unique. But with this project started in October, Parkland happened in February, which was getting actually towards one of our first deadlines.
Yeah.
The team of students were able to pivot on the spot to identify that as student voice and young people voice is so critical right now. So there's this really incredibly beautiful moment where we had students telling the story of other student activists, that we empowered this group of kids to be able to do that, that it wasn't just some social studies project that their parents were going to come see. They had this very large stage where hundreds of people were going to get to interact with it, which it totally changed the perspective that y'all had and the way that you approached the work.
Yeah, and I think going back to changing perspectives, on the day that was the memorial of King's assassination, you might have, in a typical social studies class, listened to a King speech, probably of March on Washington, probably would have heard the I Have a Dream speech. And that would have been your day at school, your hour in social studies class. But on the day of his assassination, we drove to Memphis, and we walked the Lorraine Motel, and we were there to hear, they replayed the sermon, and they talked about all of the activism that was happening at that time, the reason he was in Memphis. We were there. I got to see it. I got to go inside the Lorraine Motel, and I think that just had such a profound effect on the way that I absorbed that day. If I had been sitting in a social studies class and listened to one speech and gone home, it wouldn't have stuck with me. But the fact that we went there and saw it and lived it and experienced it had a completely it affected the way that we finished the project and the way that our team bought in after that, let's push to the end. Like, let's make this as good as we possibly can because other people deserve to have that experience. So that's just more of the buy-in on the faculty side that we drove to Memphis.
The awesome part of this too is that we have 2 of the students from that team are actually in California right now presenting on this work. So it's carried beyond the initial scope of what we thought it was going to be to where it has legs that's taken us to a lot of different places, which has just been incredibly awesome. Those are 2 of my rising seniors this year. For them going into their senior year of like, this work I did as a sophomore is still relevant and impactful now, is really great to see.
So maybe a little bit of stepping back in context. I know that when MVI-FI works with schools, one of the things that we often hear is, well, either we can't do that or we're not ready for that yet. And certainly we try to meet people where they are, but we also are upfront and say, well, we're going to push you towards an eventual future of doing big, audacious projects. So maybe start with Megan Curtin. Certainly fill in, because all of you have experience with this at some level, either about to start a project or having done a project. But like, where did design briefs come from? Like, what is a design brief? If you're sitting out there as a participant, you're like, what is a design brief? What is it? How did it start? Did we start with big, huge projects like VR, or did it start simpler than that and we built up? Like, what's the story there?
So I'll get right to the point and say that the idea of design brief really came from the kids. Like, I did not come up with that. Bo did not come up with that. When we worked with our students for the first year in Innovation Diploma, we kind of had an idea that we wanted these kids to work on projects that mattered to them. So again, like I talked about before, we gave them the reins and said, like, what do you want to work on? What is exciting to you? And we saw a lot of just blank faces. They had not been given the opportunity to think about that. They haven't been asked, what do you want to work on? What do you want to study? AJ talked about 20% time in his classroom, and I feel like it was like 100% time, for Innovation Diploma, and they were like, well, I don't know where to start. So luckily, the first opportunity came to us where the Center for Disease Control actually called one of our faculty members and asked if we would come, the MVI-FI team would come and work with them on some of their strategic health initiatives and work using the design thinking methodology to help them solve some of their problems. And we said, absolutely, we'll come, but we'd really love to bring students. They weren't really that excited about it, but we pushed forward.
We were.
They were very excited about it. And actually, I remember still walking in the room on that first day, and they had a table set aside for the kids. And then all the rest of the people, the adults, were supposed to be on the other side of the room. And they were like, you guys can sit over there. And there's this wonderful photo, actually, of Megan, where she just, like, sidles her way right in, and all the participants in this challenge are sitting down, working on their strategic health initiative, and she's standing above them, and she's kind of doing this, and they're all looking at her. So by the end of day 1, they had really bought into the fact that these guys understand design thinking, and they understand how to have creative ideas and not, be bogged down with constraints. And so on the bus ride back, they were like, well, why can't that be school? Why can't we do more of that? They felt like it was an innovation on consulting and that they were the consulting people rather than being consulted by the adults. So they coined this phrase, which still makes me laugh, called consultivation. As I felt like they innovated the idea of consulting. And so from there,
We tried.
see how proud she is?
We tried.
From there, really the challenge that we all had, that we held ourselves to, both, working together. I think it was a combined effort to try to figure out, how do we do more of this? How do we have more consultivations? And so we started with just our parent body and calling either, people that we had coffee with as adults, or kids, parents, or friends, their parents, and we called them in and said, just give us any problem that you're working on in your organization where you don't have the resources for it, whether it's money or time or personnel, and we'll help you solve it. And so we started in 90-minute chunks. We used some of lunchtime, I think, and then some of our class time, and worked on these challenges and sent them home with a couple of feasible prototypes to go ahead and implement. We even did that with our own people in Mount Vernon. So we looked at our philanthropy team, we looked at communications, how can we make that better? And so it was really us begging people to bring us their problems in the beginning. And then I think the key moment was when our head of school, Dr. Jacobson, had stood up in front of the entire community and just said, hey, would you bring us our problems? We've got a group of kids that are willing to work on it. And so from there, we got our first design brief from a parent, and that was the proof of concept that these guys could do amazing work.
Yeah. I
Well,
would
and Megan
agree
Kierton,
with
in that moment, we were sitting in the gym not far from here, and she looked over at me and said, "Did he just say, bring us your problems?" we're going to have to really change some things around.
Yeah. So first year was very, very broad. I agree. I definitely got lost in that go be free mentality. But I would I would emphasize the importance of failure at that point, because we did a ton of failing. I failed so many times.
I did too. It's fine.
And in those even beginning stages of the consultivations that then became design briefs, we changed the name, don't worry. But yeah, in those small 90-second, 90-minute segments, we saw our teams coming together, and like you could tell if somebody that you were working with was like not bought in, because it was just a waste of 90 minutes then, and nobody left very happy. But some of them were really exciting, and we were really engaged and able to actually put together something that was usable for whoever happened to be in the room at that time. And so that's, for me, where I kind of realized that there's this level of buy-in, not being afraid to fail, because I had done it enough times at this point that I knew they weren't going to kick me out or anything, but also that the buy-in was really, really important for not only me, but for our team to like sit there and say, you know what, yes, I love this problem. Let's make it happen, because if we fail, everything will be okay. So that was, first year for me was, yes, very broad, but I learned about buy-in and failure, I think. Really important things.
And Ted, can you tell us some about maybe how your perceptions, or some of the people that work at Center for Civil and Human Rights, how their perceptions changed of thinking about high school students' work at the beginning of the project versus the end of the project?
Yeah, I mean, that was probably, the toughest part of it, especially coming from, a classroom and knowing what a school project was, and kind of thinking, in our initial conversations, this is great, but let's see what happens, right? And then, pitching me and showing me stuff, this is where we've worked with this development team, and seeing it, and then really getting a sense of how Mount Vernon worked. And I think that's where it was huge. And I went back to our folks and our exhibits team and said, what's happening here is not some extracurricular kind of fluff. Like, this is substantial work. And we had just come off a project with SCAD, which is a college here with a satellite campus in Atlanta, that did not go well. And so we really had to convince not just one person, but really organizationally, that this was worth another go, but in a totally different direction.
That's great. And Crystal, will you say something about what you think this type of work with students, from the youngest students at Mount Vernon that engage in design thinking and maker work, all the way up to our oldest students, like, what does it mean in terms of developing those mindsets you mentioned as you interact with corporate executives?
That's interesting. I mentioned I have a 10-month-old, but I also have a 5-year-old who's here at Mount Vernon as well. And I probably see it in him more than anything. And even as someone who teaches this stuff, I said something to him the other day. His teacher's in this class somewhere, and he said she'll be glad to know that he said, well, anything's possible, Mom. And I realized that I had whatever idea, I don't even remember what it was, had shut that down somehow. And he came back at me with anything is possible. And I thought that was amazing, right? And so just being able to cultivate that confidence in them at a young age until the very minute they graduate, I think is remarkable, actually, and it's something that has really taken me by surprise. As I work with leaders, I feel like we, especially in the corporate environment, there's a lot of fear of failure. There is a lot of, so to hear you say I failed and that's cool, like, and I knew nothing would happen, if only people knew that and understood that in many companies, right? And so I feel like there are so many things that we can learn from children, which is one reason why I want to kind of put adults and children back together again, because we can learn so much from one another. And then just the idea of kind of geared for possibility. Like, hey, I think we by the time we get to this place in our lives, we realize all the things that won't work, and sometimes we hold on to those. And then you talk to a child that has been, groomed in a certain way, that anything is possible. And so, yeah, I think it's really remarkable, really remarkable. And I think there's a lot to be said for even no matter who's doing the work or how you're engaging, but it's just allowing organizations with real problems to benefit from open minds. It's awesome.
That's great. So I'm mindful of time and want to make sure you get to ask at least a few questions. So what are your questions for this panel?
We were so good at what we said, they don't
I
have
know,
any.
there's no questions.
I'm curious what young Megan is majoring in.
Well, right now, if you ask the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, they'll tell you that I'm a biomedical engineering major. We'll see if that happens. I do anticipate to do some feeling around and maybe changing, but I'm pretty STEM focused, so something in that realm.
How did the diploma experience change your trajectory as far as what you thought you wanted to do coming into it? Did you have any ideas as you came in, and then as you left, had it changed or matured?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming into high school, I would have told you that I wanted to be a trauma surgeon in the Army. That was what 7th grade me thought I wanted to do. Innovation Diploma opened my eyes exponentially. I cannot say enough about the experience that I've had, mainly in building skills within me in terms of empathy and communication. Those things, I cannot even iterate to you how important they are in today's world. And for me as a college student, I feel like going into any room, I'm now able to connect with individuals, hear their perspectives, and learn from them. And that ability has definitely impacted the way that I see the world and the way that I think about what I'm going to do. So yes, while I might major in something STEM-related, biomedical engineering, I know that I have skills that are not really built to stand in a lab all day. I know that if I were to do that, I would be doing a disservice not only to myself, but to others, because I think Innovation Diploma has awarded me the skills to be able to help other people and just really stand in someone else's shoes and solve a problem. So hopefully that engineering mindset can take me somewhere else where I'm actually able to do more social, change-making work. And I would definitely say that those skills come from Innovation Diploma in terms of confidence, empathy, and communication. So,
What is it you're going to do on Saturday when you leave Fuse?
on Saturday, I'm driving from Atlanta to Toronto, and I'm going to work for 8 weeks with a company called Evergreen Brickworks in Toronto, Canada, focused on sustainability and inclusivity within the city, really allowing all the members of the city to benefit from what the city has to offer, marginalized populations and disabled peoples. So we'll see what happens.
What else from you out there? Go ahead, Connie.
Can you guys talk a little bit more about if there is more variety in how design briefs are posed? Like, is it always 90-minute sessions with a client, or is it also in a variety of ways throughout the day?
So the 90-minute sessions were the ones that we sort of started with. We now, the one with the center, how many months was that?
7, 8 months?
So
Too many.
they range depending on what the problem is, what the client's availability is. I feel like there's some sort of probably sweet spot. Maybe a few months long would be the longest that I would say. But I think it depends on what are the needs of the organization that you're working with and the availability, because you want to make sure that that other client on the other side is available to meet with the students. Otherwise, if you have a 7-month design brief and you don't have Ted on the other end who's rooting for the kids, then maybe isn't available, and the kids might lose steam.
How do you work that in with your rotation of your classes and so on?
You want to take that one?
Yeah. So this year we actually had a new schedule. So we actually are currently rethinking how all of it fits into your school day. So we're actually playing with different lengths of briefs. So, and having them set out from the beginning of this is going to last us 6 weeks. This is going to last us 12 weeks, and show the scope of that with the clients on the front end. Crystal and I are actually working on what does 8 weeks look like over the span of this project, and having those in place so it lines up better. With the new schedule, we have our Innovation Diploma students 70 minutes every day for 6-week chunks of time, which has totally changed the amount of work we can do because we can go deeper in those moments. Now, I also know, and I won't speak for Megan, but like those projects exist outside of the school day. I don't know how many times I got a text that was like, hey, we're heading into downtown to do film, and it was a random Saturday. And I think that type of work demands a different level of student commitment. And when you put them in that moment, we haven't had students not rise to that occasion. We always laugh, like, no matter where we set the bar, our students always meet it. Just this year, it was an 8-month-long brief with Delta Airlines, and I challenged them to turn the hive upstairs into a replica of a gate. They all looked at me like I was insane in August, but they like totally nailed it in April. As we continue to play with that, time always comes into it, and we're constantly going back. So for all the success stories that you've heard tonight, there are plenty of moments where we've like fallen on our faces, and even like briefs that we've almost lost, and clients who have almost walked out on the work that we're doing. It wasn't perfect every time, and a lot of that has to do with timing.
One last question, and then I just am conscious of y'all getting a good night's sleep so you can come ready to do some incredible things tomorrow.
Just out of curiosity, do the students have to see it through to its end, or what if I'm at some point in it and I'm wanting to switch, or you know what, this really isn't working for me?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've played with that over the years too. So right now I had students who stuck with the entire Delta brief. I had students that came in at different points along the way. We're playing a lot with how students identify as the type of work they do. So are there students who are more prone to doing the research and setting up project work? Are there students who are better at the fabrication at the end of it and having those conversations with them so they play into their strengths, while also balancing that with like, get out of your comfort zone. Don't just stay in the research phase because that's where you like to be. That's where the transition of the program over time has been really fascinating, because we used to not have that constraint. We had students all year. With the new schedule that I'm happy to talk with more after, students rotate in and out every 6 weeks, so the team is constantly in flux. I have some who are like all in, they're there all the time, and I can't keep them away. But we also have some that like, they popped in at the end of the Delta brief, and they're like, how can I be relevant to this work right now? Which is big. All of us do that on the daily as adults of like, where can I plug in to have the highest point of impact and contribution? So we talk a lot about students there. Just because you weren't here for the whole time doesn't mean you had less of an impact on this brief.
All right, we'll squeeze one more in.
Do they get a grade and credit?
So as we have grown,
I didn't.
Megan did not.
I got badges.
You got badges. Freshmen and sophomores receive grades because of the way the schedule is set up. So since they are earning credit for humanities and biology, as freshmen and humanities as sophomores, we do award a letter grade for it. Assessment is very difficult when you do this type of work. It's actually the most difficult part of what we do. How do you actually track this type of growth and learning over time? Upperclassmen don't. So when they're working with a Delta, where they're working with the center, there is no letter grade or number that I could assign to the work that she did. I would never even try. What shows success from that was that on opening day at the center, there was a line around the balcony to do the experiences. Like, that's what this is about, y'all. Like, there's nothing I could put on a transcript that gives that the type of justice that it deserves. So. But we're constantly wrestling with it, especially as we move into like, we're that school within a school that's trying to change the way that all of our students learn. We have to come up with a way to show that growth.
I just want to say one small thing. A lot of times within the school setting, we ran up against it a lot. People are like, if you don't give them a grade, like how are they gonna, go to college? What are colleges gonna think when they get that application on their desk? I have heard it from the people at the Moorhead Cain Foundation. I know it for myself that I would not have been awarded the Moorhead Cain Scholarship if it were not for my Innovation Diploma experiences that did not come with a grade. They came with a story, they came with feedback, they came with impactful results, but there was no grade there. So if you're bumping heads with the idea that there's no number associated, how are we going to quantify this work? You don't need to. Like, it's not the point. So
we wrestled with having a panel about one of our own programs, Innovation Diploma Program, for fear of maybe seeming like we were patting ourselves on the back. And I just want to relay to you all that's not the intent. I think about things like Roger Bannister breaking the 5-minute mile, and the people said it could never, ever be done. And then as soon as he did it, 39 more people did it in the next 12 months. And so whatever your innovation diploma program looks like, if it's students innovating something within your own school, within their own classroom, within your own backyard, like that is breaking the mile barrier, right? And so we just believe in this norm of sharing the well and telling our story, and we look forward to hearing your stories in these next 2 days and beyond. And let's thank our panel. Thank you so much for being here.